really want to change something. Entrepreneurs, community builders, people who really want to move something around.
It's truly an amazing experience. For me, it was really a good entry point to enter the startup world. So my background is in finance and investing. I went to the Europe conference in London and then attended my first global conference last year and this year again. I met so many interesting people. If you have any hesitations, you truly need to get connected in your local chapter.
Basically, what we do is try to reach for the best speaker possible that will allow founders to learn. You have to meet a lot of people and you have to create a real connection with those people, focusing on adding value to their lives, but also in learning and helping them in every way you can and to scale faster.
Startup Grind gave me the opportunity to really achieve that. So now I'm running one of the most active chapters in China and in the world. And I am on a daily basis meeting so amazing people, entrepreneurs, investors, corporates. I'm really grateful being part of this amazing community.
San Francisco, Lagos,
New York City,
Dubai,
Dublin,
Oakland,
China.
So hi guys, we were just waiting that if there are more people who are willing to join or are going to join, but it's we should start our session today. And Rishita and Atul could also record the session, and you guys can put the session on the recording thing, and then we could start. So give us an indication when you guys do this, when you guys start the recording. Hi everyone. Hi, welcome to second online session organized by Startup Grind Noida. Today we have with us three founders, Animesh, Kushagra, and Suraj, who started an edutech startup or e-learning startup, Costa. Here we will understand how and why did they not took their startup forward. So I'm not taking much of a time, couple of logistical issues that we will try to follow a small structure that first we will have a Q&A. First we will have a discussion with the founders, Animesh, Kushagra, and Suraj, 30 minutes each. So in total 30 minutes and then Q&A. For the Q&A, you guys could put down your questions in the chat interface. And then one by one, you guys could come and you could introduce yourself and ask the question, and that would be also help us in networking, knowing each other better. Let us know if there's any problem in the Zoom is working or not, if the video is problem. And we will be recording this session and uploading this thing on our Startup Grind local YouTube channel. So let's kickstart. It's a good evening today, and hope the rest of the evening would be much more inspiring and much more. We could learn a lot from these founders. EdTech startups in India are helping fixing the fractured traditional education ecosystem in the country. With a nearly $2 billion opportunity in the growing online education market in India, the entrepreneurs are offering some of the best online learning platform to strengthen the overall education in India. This Startup Grind online session is all about how much edutech space is exciting and what led the 3 billion founders to go for an unsuccessful exit. Online education is a far more varied sector compared to the internet businesses, but the biggest categories are naturally those linked to better job prospects. Broadly, we could say they are K-12, post-K-12 categories, and B2B startups selling software to coaching institutes and schools to enable their digital operations. And you might be also very much excited to hear this, that it is estimated that by 2022, the K-12 market will expand by 6 times to about $1.7 billion. With this exponential number in our mind, we open our discussion with co-founders of Costa, Animesh Sharma, Kushak Chandra, and Suraj Kumar. This session is mostly about what not to do, what path not to take. And I myself, Pranjal Jain, chapter director of Startup Grind. With us, we have Rishita, Startup Grind chapter director from Jammu, and Atul Verma from the Startup Grind team. So let's kickstart with Animesh first. So we would, I would love you all of three, Animesh, Kushag, and Suraj, to introduce yourself to the audience of Startup Grind. Over to you guys.
Yeah, thanks, Pranjal. So I'll start. My name is Animesh. I have around total 6 years of experience, startup plus corporate. I'm currently working with Indian Express as a software development manager. I spent around 2 years in an edtech startup, Coster. My role was there basically around building the tech product, releasing new product features, and integration of sales with those newly released product features as well. Before that, I worked for 2 years with ST Media. So that's what sums up my journey and my career till now. Kushag, would you like to take over?
Yeah, thanks, Animesh. So everyone, I am Kushag Chandra. I currently work at OYO as software development engineer. I have around 6 years of experience in both startup as well as corporate experience. In the startup, I mainly had my role was to manage and develop the website and manage a team which were under me. And I started my career from Cvent earlier that.
Thank you, Kushag.
Suraj, can you continue?
Suraj, I think you're muted.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, sorry, guys. I'll restart. So, guys, I'm Suraj. I'm of course one of the team members of Costa. Presently, I'm working as a principal research engineer at Ixigo, and at Ixigo, my role is basically to see the management and development of next-gen AI-based travel products. Prior to this, I was indulged with Kushagra and Animesh in Costa. In Costa, my primary role was to manage the development and release cycles of mobile applications. Along with that, I helped with creating marketing strategies, marketing materials, and help out wherever I can in sales and product discussions. I graduated in 2014 with Animation Kushagra itself.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Animesh, Kushag, Suraj. Lovely to have you today, and eagerly waiting to hear your story. Animesh, to you about the Costa. Could you guys could you tell us that how did you guys meet? What led to this idea? And why the student learning platform? Why only the student learning platform?
Okay. So for those of you who don't know us personally, we all three of us are from the same college, same year pass outs. We are graduates of Delhi College of Engineering from the 2014 batch. So this idea basically came up during our college days itself. Why it came up and what led us to that idea, I'll let you know. So all of us must have experienced that when we switch from the K-12 era and go into college, there is a stark difference in the learning patterns of each student. Till the 12th standard, there is a very hand-holding process of students. The teachers pay a lot of attention to the students. Every material is provided to you. You are taught, you're told what books to read, right? And then when you go into a college or an institution, everything becomes, kind of a self-learning or peer learning kind of a situation for every one of us. So basically 20 years you spend doing one thing, and just after 20 years you are told to do that. No, this is not the way to go. For the rest of your life, you have to take a different approach. So that comes as a very big surprise to all the students. And you must have seen many students struggle to learn and to acquire that education when they enter college in the first year itself. So this happened to all of us, right? Maybe there might be some exceptions, obviously, who are really good and who can adapt to such a drastic change at such a drastic pace. But at least we three were surely one of those that suffered at this drastic change. So when we talked about it, this thought basically resonated among all three of us. So we thought, why not do something that can basically help up till the K-12 students to basically get accustomed to that new kind of learning that they will ultimately have to acquire when they graduate out of their 12th standard and reach into college and further life. So that's why in our fourth year, as a major project, we thought of launching a platform that could basically provide this kind of a blended learning or peer-to-peer learning or an experiential learning kind of a platform. So in our fourth year, that was our major project, our thesis that was submitted to the college itself. At first, we thought that we could release the platform, we could build the product in college itself. But you know, every college student is very dewy-eyed and irrespective of whether he has worked in the corporate sector or not, he feels that he can build any product and release it the next day. We were of the same thinking at that time. But as we built the product, we realized that there was a lot of complexities, a lot of intricacies inside that product that we could not fathom at that particular point of time. So we released a POC or a thesis kind of a project into college and decided to join the corporate sector. We worked with corporates, different companies for 2 years, different domains, learned how to build products, how a product can actually be, diverted or basically used to generate revenue for a business. So technical skills were acquired, business skills were acquired during those 2 years with the corporates. We did a lot of learning. And when we were sure that the learnings that we had acquired during our stints with the corporates for those 2 years were sufficient, we decided to move on to the startup arena. So after 2 years, after graduating from college, we basically took up full-time entrepreneurship and decided to launch Coster. Why the name Coster? Why exactly did we call it Coster? So we basically wanted a name that was short, that was unique, never heard before, and basically that resonated with the idea of learning, right? So Coster is basically derived from an Estonian word caustic, which means documented or ledgered books, knowledgeable portions that you can consume basically. So around that same idea, we transformed the word and caustic became Coster and K became our symbol or our logo that basically everyone could relate to. So that was the journey basically we took. It was a great experience. I'm sure, I guess both of the other two co-founders will agree with me. But I'm sure it was a hell of a ride, and we'll discuss it as we proceed.
Right. So moving on, as I mentioned in my introduction, Animesh, that there are two kind of categories in the education world, the K-12 and the post-K-12. So could you unpack the word K-12, post-K-12 for our startup brand audience?
Yeah. So K-12 is basically short for your journey from your kindergarten till your 12th standard. So basically your entire school life. So again, as I said, during your K-12 journey, you are provided a lot of hand holding. There are coaching classes, there are teachers dedicated for you. The class sizes are very small. You are provided a very safe and very protected environment. So that whatever the journey that a student takes up till the 12th standard, starting from kindergarten, is the K-12 scenario. It goes same in the business field as well. Post K-12 is when you move on to your institutional learning or your corporate learning, which basically resonates with your skill development. So that is basically the post K-12 scenario related to learning.
And I assume your startup was also focusing on the K-12 segment.
Yeah. Yeah. So because we suffered such a drastic change post K-12, we did not want the next generations to suffer that drastic change post K-12. So why not introduce those concepts within K12 itself?
And you were focusing on all classes from the till the 12th class. Were you only looking at 11th, 12th only?
So for the higher classes, we were providing content and educational resources, but not for the lower classes. So our content mostly began post 5th class, because below that the students are not able to comprehend the online educational material that well. So below 5th it was meant only for the teachers, and beyond 5th it was meant for both the students and the teachers.
So this is very interesting when you brought this concept of K12 to our audience. So could you elaborate, how do you think students in the K12 category learn?
I guess Suraj would be a better person to answer that. He explored a lot of material around that.
Yeah, thanks, Animesh. So essentially what our learning, as Animesh mentioned, was that peer-to-peer learning actually works very well for students. It gives them a confidence, and when you indulge in peer-to-peer learning, you teach essentially. A student is also becomes a teacher, and most of the time is not just bookish learning and facts-based analysis, but a lot of discussions happen during those peer-to-peer sessions. So our aim was to emulate those scenarios on our platform. One of the main issues with traditional education systems, which we presently have, is that the teachers have a limited scope with the students, right? So a teacher nowadays in K-12 classrooms generally cater to around 300 students per session. So it's damn near impossible for any particular human being to give undivided attention to 300 students in a particular session concurrently. So what we aimed to do was to build a platform, and you can say a learning management system, which would aid teachers in doing that. It would expand the bounds of the classroom for the teachers on a internet-based social platform, right? The aim was also to increase the collaborative learning between the students, because most of the students who study in a particular school do not necessarily live in the same area. So if they were provided a healthy, secure environment in which they can discuss their doubts and new concepts, then it would be very beneficial for the collaborative learning part. There was another thing which we explored was flipped classrooms. The flipped classrooms are essentially a generally accepted teaching pedagogy, which is different than what we see today in our Indian education system. What it says that the teaching time of a teacher inside the classroom should be reserved for discussions and not just stating facts, not just the rote reading out loud of books and all. So what it does is that it creates recyclable pieces of information which can be used by each session, and students can get an overview of what they are going to have a discussion in the following class before the class itself. It also escapes the student the part where he can miss for some reason or the other. If he misses a particular class, the content is already available to him. And given the discussions are also happening on the platform, they have a very good view of what exactly happened in the class. So it is kind of a story-based learning pedagogy in which collaboration is the king rather than just rote learning and traditional systems.
Right, Suraj, thank you for telling us. And so, as per your experience, what has changed back in 2017, and what do you see at this present moment in this pandemic time, where there is a surge of online education now, everyone is learning. So how do you think at this present moment the learning capability is changing, or technology has taken over, or is solving the problem of which you are mentioning? Is someone doing the same thing? Your views on that?
Yes, the thing is that pandemic actually taught the education system a lot about brick and mortar based learning institutions. The main thing was that the pandemic, the coronavirus, as it is very lethal in when when a person is in enclosed social gathered space, which essentially what classes are. It is kind of a petri dish environment for coronavirus. So it was obvious that the traditional school systems will not work. What I'm very disappointed to see is that even though the educational institutions are very eager to adapt the learning technology in the learning methodologies, they are not doing in the way we think would be the best suitable for the students and the teachers. What they are presently doing is just imitating the brick and mortar flow of the traditional classroom systems into an online world. They are just creating an online classroom in which teacher is just stating the facts. They're not following the pedagogies, different pedagogies like blended learning or flipped classroom here. So the experiential crisis of the student remains the same. So what I think is that whether online or offline, so before it was offline, presently due to coronavirus, it's online. The time spent by a student in a classroom should be an experience, not just rote learning from a book, right? So although the acceptance of a technology in education has increased a lot, it is not particularly going the right direction, I will presume. But yeah, this can be a seed towards integrating more technology into the education, and what we thought, what we as a society thinks, most of the learning analysts throughout the world think education should be in the modern world.
Right. Thank you, Suraj. So I would love to bring Kushagra at this point and want to ask him that when you guys have that such brilliant idea and that this novel idea of experiential learning, flipped classroom, blended learning, and having this brilliant understanding of this pedagogy, why did you guys quit? Why have you not taken your plan forward? What made you to quit?
Yeah, thanks, Pranjal. So during our startup, we made many mistakes, which eventually led us to the shutdown of our startup. So first of all, we all three co-founders are from tech backgrounds. So we took tech for granted and thought that tech is everything, and we never gave any attention to other aspects of the startup, like marketing and sales. Okay, so we thought that every big tech companies are doing the same, and we have to just copy that and do it. So it eventually led us. Led us to have less sales after that because we never sold the idea of the POC in the early stage of the product development. Why this important? Because it helps the team to identify the any issues which are lying under the product, which are hiding in the pain sites, to capture it in the early stages and work on that and fix that before the main rollout is done. For example, our website went live in April 2016, but our first sale came in December 2017, almost 20 months later. So in this duration, we exhausted around 75% of our resources. So which makes me to come to this third point, that to overcome this, we devoted our attention to other aspects, other verticals like freelancing, tech consultancy, to support our company and employees, everything. So that further hampered our focus and resources away from the things we were doing at that time. So with ever shrinking resources and low and very less investor interest, we decided to close down the product and the startup.
Right. I do empathize with you guys, and I do understand that even if you guys have the POC, the customer was not there. And
yeah, so we never sold that POC to any live customers and see what was breaking that POC or that prototype like things.
And then it's the big question, the capital. Was the money which you had, as you tell that you have to do a side jobs as well to keep feeding yourself as you are into this full time and you are not dependent on any other or not even on your job or something. So is there a need of having unlimited capital to scale up in the tech space, which we have listened, and we know a couple of big startups in India which are unicorn, which have that scale, money and capital in their hand. Is it easier for them to scale up? How does the picture looks for a not so big entrepreneur or a startup in the edutech space?
Yeah, so first of all, I would say that unlimited capital is not required, but yeah, capital in itself is required, because if you don't have any capital, you can't do any POC or any sales or any pre-sales like thing. Yeah, so for a startup, just manage your finances, just made a road plan on how to invest and where to invest and how much financial capital you have at that point of time will make sense and will eventually make you grow and make the product successful.
I assume that you guys might have saved when you guys were doing a job and you were able to get some money from your side jobs, but still that was not sufficient to go forward. But it was good enough to make POC and launch.
Yeah. So before jumping into the startup for the full time, we had around 1.5 to 2 years of experience in industry. So we have limited amounts of funds because when you start a career, you don't have much salary at that time, right? So that money was exhausted very pretty quick because we didn't have any road plan and where to invest and where to put the money in and that sort of things. So eventually when we had capital issues, we took freelancing works and tech consultancy works, which again led us to deviate from our main focus on our product and from our already limited bandwidth.
So it must be very hard. Yeah, sure.
One point I would like to mention. So we also did a lot of things to save money actually, not just the saved resources that we had before beginning. We also had some, major cuts that we did in various things to basically save money. For example, the place where we were living, we transformed that into our office space itself. So only the rooms were spared. Every other space that was available in the house was basically converted into the office space itself. So those kind of measures were also taken. So it's not just about having a pre-saved amount of money that can basically take you across and finish your journey. It's also about basically how you utilize that sum, basically how you save onto that sum and use it for better purposes. So that's what we tried to do, and that's what I guess that took us that far. Had we not been that meager with saving, with spending, we would not have gotten that far also.
So it must have been very hard for you guys to stop the dream, the passion that you guys have. So before moving on, Animesh, I would love to understand what led you to decide that I do understand the points which Kushag mentioned, but also to move on to this present day in the pandemic time. Like we are seeing the pandemic driven expansion in online education. From market leaders to smaller startups, entrepreneurs are certain that this is a defining movement for the sector. So what do you think about the current time for online education? If you would have been continuing somehow, would it have been helpful for you or something? Your thoughts on that?
Seeing the current scenario, I guess, yes, there is a big shift in the, adaptation of technology across various institutions, schools, colleges, everything. But the solutions that are being adapted, or rather the approach that is being taken by the institutions, is not what I'm syncing with. So I've seen a lot of, since I was in that space, when this occurred, I was very excited. Like, this is the time when this will boom, this will go like explode, and this will become the next big thing. I even talked to Suraj and Kushag about relaunching it, but we saw what the schools were actually doing. So schools are taking up things like Microsoft Teams to teach students online. Microsoft Teams in any way is not an educational platform. People are using Zoom to conduct online classes, right? And then we get those funny videos on WhatsApp that are being shared of students making fun of teachers and everything. That platform is not meant for those things. So the solutions that the schools and colleges have adapted, they are basically kind of hacks. They know this is a temporary thing. This will fade away. 3 months, 6 months, 9 months at max. At some point, it will come to an end. So in the meantime, in the temporary situation that we have, we might as well get a solution for that, which we do not have to pay a lot of money, and which does, kind of work just like what you used to do in the physical classrooms. Just make it work somehow for the temporary time being, and later on, ultimately the classes will be back. So it will just be the same. So that is the approach that is being taken. So I'm not in sync with the approach, but yes, there is a definite boom, and this is the moment for EdTech that it will explode definitely.
Suraj, would you love to highlight more that what is the market at this present moment? Yeah.
Yeah, so definitely, I guess Animesh covered a lot of the ground, which when we reinstated a conversation about relaunching our product during the COVID times, which we had here. The thing is that the experiential learning, which I talked about, we are not still seeing steps taken towards that. So education in India and of course across the world was a challenge from beforehand, before the COVID-19 struck. Right, everybody knew that education is broken. What we are seeing today due to the pandemic is that what they are doing is that they are just trying to imitate what they used to do in the brick and mortar based classroom onto an online world. They're not trying to include the specificities, the power of the technology, which can induce and infuse motivation among students to learn better, to study better. The core problem, which I think with the education system, is that students are not motivated enough. They do not have interest enough. The teachers are trying their best to help those students, but the break point happens when the student himself or herself is not that much interested in learning. So although I'm very hopeful because of the infusion of technology into the education system nowadays due to the pandemic, but I would definitely like to see more steps taken towards this in order to make education a more wholesome process, more entertaining process, more kind of like a collaborative process, rather than just a teacher coming to a classroom, whether it's online or in a offline scenario, and dictating facts, and that's it. Another thing is that students needs to have a good rapport with the teachers. So one thing which is missing and was missing is that the teachers do not have enough data points per student basis. So in every classroom, there are some students who perform exceptionally well while not doing good in other classrooms, right? So we can use technology to mitigate that. Pandemic situation, what it tells us is that every student is going to receive the same screen time, the same information which the teacher is distributing to the whole class. There is no kind of like teacher-student distance which happens in a particular brick and mortar-based classrooms, and it can be a very what do you say, opportunistic time for the teachers to switch the learning pedagogies and test out different variations, which is most beneficial for the students in the coming days. But yes, definitely. The infusion of technology in education system because of this pandemic is really inspiring, and I'm hopeful that it will turn out into a better system than what we used to have before.
Right.
Even after the pandemic ends, of course.
Kushag, is there something you would love to add on, or shall we move on?
Regarding which topic? Can you repeat?
Scenario, if you would have been here, how you would have been doing something different. I think the co-founders, your friends, have already covered, but is there some different angle you want to bring in to this present scenario, and if you would have been continuing this your startup?
Sorry, you were breaking. Can you repeat again?
So I mean to ask that the present scenario, how do you see it very different if it would have not been there? How the edtech space would have been? Yes, there is acceptability because there is no other option at this present moment. We are forced to adopt the technology. That is also the angle which we need to also see. But at the same time, one of the participants also say that in Kushag, there is no learning happening. There is only education education being imparted, whether the student want to learn or not. In that case, how do you see technology as an important player?
So I think most of the points are covered by my other partners. So I would like to say that now, because of pandemic, we all know that we can do work from home, and also we can do remote learning. There might be some system which can provide a seamless experience. There might be some system which can provide a seamless experience, and that sort of presentation that a student can use to learn. So I think this opportunity can be taken by many startups to develop that kind of a system.
Right. So moving on to the last leg of our discussion, the future plans, the post-pandemic. I would love to bring in Suraj at this point to ask him, what do you think the pandemic passes? You have covered bits and pieces in your presentation, but just summarize those for our startup brand audience. Will the users go back to offline coaching, preferring the in-person interaction? What do you think about?
So I guess there would be a significant number of users who will transform back to how things were pre-pandemic era, that they will switch to again to the brick and mortar based classrooms, depending more on the teacher-student interaction inside the classroom rather than the online one. But definitely there would be some outliers who would explore the possibility of using remote learning, not just as a replacement for pandemic time classroom learning, but a tool to cater more towards students, a tool to do more, a way of knowledge, recycling the knowledge, a way of essentially introducing collaborative learning. So I'm hopeful in that aspect, definitely. But yeah, but what our experiences with the education system during our startup was, I think most likely most of the teachers and education institutions will shift back to pre-pandemic times as soon as the pandemic passes.
Right. To Anish now, how do you think the coaching classes would be working in this post-pandemic time, if and when we are able to go out of this pandemic or the current scenario? Your thoughts on that?
So I believe even before the pandemic, the coaching classes are somewhat struggling. You know, the big players, they are doing well, because they have been around for some years. They know how to handle students, how to adapt to the changing syllabus, curriculum, etc. But the new teachers coming in, the smaller tutors are basically struggling. And with the advent of different startups, especially like Byju's, there is a restriction on the movement of students towards coaching classes, right? So coaching classes will have to evolve, and they are taking definite steps towards it. Even when we were working on our startup, we saw definite inclination from private tutors and coaching centers. The inclination was much more compared to schools and other educational institutions, because they are private. They can make changes quickly, they can adapt to technology quickly. They know when they present a different teaching methodology, that is the incentive that they'll be providing to their students to get them on board.
Right.
So coaching classes will definitely evolve. Not all, but there is a fair chance compared to schools and other educational institutions that the coaching classes will evolve faster and will take the technological route, not these the current hacks that are being employed, but proper solutions that will be adapted by the coaching institutions. They will have to go to a hybrid model, physical plus digital, very soon, and that will be very soon.
Right. So in the coaching center space, we have seen that there is already a use of technology in the sense of use of notes, which are now, first earlier it was distributed through CDs, then came the pen drive, now came the Google Cloud or a Dropbox kind of services. And now the move is towards having a proper platform on which they could teach themselves. But at the same time, how do you think the pricing model will change? As now everyone is offering online classes, how this pricing thing will work around in the coaching center space, if you want to think about it?
Right. So in the coaching space currently, not taking into account the bigger players, like the Kotas and the Fedgis kind of players, talking in terms of the local domestic private tutors. Till now, what the revenue model that they are used to is basically one student comes into their coaching center, he pays a monthly fees, they impart him some education. The fees is considerably higher for one student, so they are used to that, but the number of students is quite less. When they take this hybrid approach, the number of students will not be limited to say 20 or 30 that reside within that particular area. When they go online, just like what happens to the sellers on Amazon or any other e-commerce platform, when these private tutors take the online route, they will be exposed to a plethora of students. If the content is good, obviously that is one of the basic parameters that they'll have to pass. If that is good, they'll be exposed to a plethora of students, and since the quantity of students which will be much larger, they'll have to bring down the cost considerably. So it won't be like I'll teach you one subject per month for $2,000. So 3 subjects, that makes it $6,000 per student. So I get around 50 students, so I make a lot of money per month. It won't be like now, it won't be 50 students, it will be 500 students per month, and it won't be 6,000 rupees, but 600 say per month. So that you'll have to cut down.
And there could be
essentially increase in market size and increase in revenue, and decrease per unit of student for the teachers. So actually, we saw this happening with our system itself. Although with the small amount of tutors we had, which onboarded our system, but there were a few cases in which the teachers said that they put up videos not for other students to learn, but their own students to what you can say revise after a particular classroom. And they said that friends of those students reach out to essentially the teacher himself, that okay sir, because of some scheduling conflict and distance conflict, I cannot join your class, but if you would be kind enough to like charge a fraction of the fee and allow me to learn from the website itself after seeing your videos, then that would be very helpful for them. So we saw this back in 2017 itself, that there was a significant demand of good teachers, good storytellers, the teachers who teach students not on the basis of facts or a bookish knowledge, but kind of on a compelling argument of storytelling. So we saw that happening back in 2017 itself, but yeah, let's be hopeful that in post-pandemic times, there are more teachers like him who come aboard platforms which allow them to democratize the market more and help students get better quality of tutors in even the remotest part of India.
So there is more hope from the coaching institute side rather than the
yes,
educational
definitely.
institution side.
And in India, that has been the case. We have seen coaching centers working around as a supplementary education more, and they adopt fast compared to other education institutions in India. So Kushal, the question which I would also like to ask you is that how would holistic education look like in the post-pandemic time? A broad thought on that.
What I think is in the school market, nothing major will be changed because there's not a platform right now which can seamlessly integrate physical and online classrooms in a single class right now. Also, we need to consider the fact that in India, more than 55% of the students doesn't have a proper system or cannot afford the proper system to attend an online class or join an online class. So how will you overcome that fact? I cannot see that figure growing up or going down in near future.
I guess there is a need for a startup which can convince schools to switch from the methodical approach which they use presently into a more exciting experience-based learning. There is a very good, we were not able to convince the schools to shift their teaching pedagogy, but yes, hopefully there might be some people who have that skill set, specifically that part of the skill set where they are able to convince school from moving from the archaic solutions which they presently use for imparting education and into the more modern era of essentially what education of the future would look like.
But the challenge again still would be the physical environment which the school provides, which the technology won't be able to give. And that the physical space, the money the school invests in the playground and the classroom experience, the teacher being present there. I do not myself have the answer, and I do not know how that would evolve. Yes,
so
there could be a habit.
I think on this part that most of the technology solutions which we see today do not cost a ton of money for a simple school. So if a single school is like to build their own system for the different pedagogies of learning, it would definitely be very expensive for them. But through a more of a collaborative startup approach, which can provide cater to multiple schools at a time, the cost can be reduced significantly per school. So it would be minuscule, apparently negligible in the terms of what schools generally invest in construction of those playgrounds and classroom services, which you said. EduComp was an example which had very high cost, but the acceptance of EduComp technologies inside schools was unparalleled at that time. Many schools, even because, in spite of the high cost, accepted EduComp as their essentially smart learning provider. I think there is a space there if someone is able to like convince the schools to move to a technological solution and democratize the market using the same infrastructure for multiple schools. The cost would not be a significant issue.
Plus, the schools will have to somehow realize that bringing in a technological solution will not, magically make the buildings and the physical classrooms disappear. That is impossible. That is, according to me at least, that is impossible. That is how human beings are raised. We are taught to interact with other human beings to learn new things. So the physical classrooms are not going anywhere, at least in the near future. So when the schools realize that, they'll be more open to a technological solution that basically, supplements instead of complementing or giving a parallel approach, a technological solution that basically supplements their existing teaching pedagogy. So that's that when they are open to that kind of a solution, that solution will definitely come up.
Thank you guys. Before closing the discussion we have, and there are many very good questions which are there in the chat. Before taking those questions, so the last question to all of you would be to Anish, Kushagra, and Suraj, your personal plan, and are you guys thinking to start any new startup in coming days or months? What next for you guys? A very not so good question, but yeah, just asking what next for you guys.
I guess the answer would be never say never, right? So we do have some reservations about starting up again because our last experience was definitely not ideal as we had hoped. But yeah, never say never. We are still hopeful. We actually learned a lot from our startup, both in terms of technology, sales, marketing, and now have a better perspective on how things work in this entrepreneurial world. But yeah, not immediate, but yeah, definitely. We will see when a situation arises. We see an opportunity which we think we can contribute to improve. We'll definitely, I guess for me personally, I'll definitely get into that.
Thank you guys.
So as they say, once an entrepreneur, always an entrepreneur.
Right. Never say never with the spirit. Always go with the spirit. Thank you guys. So we have very good questions, and I assume that a couple of questions have been already answered, but still, the partner to come and introduce himself or herself first, and then ask those questions they have from the enemies, Kushagra and Suraj. The first question could be is from Cyril. If you want to ask something, Cyril.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask. Hi, I'm Cyril, and I'm working in DevOps platform. So since these three have done a lot in the startup world and may have got a very good experience in having how to go with starting up from scratch. So that's why I was asking that if you have to rate or by percentage in the in sorting the departments like tech, sales, marketing, PR, SEO, or so. So how would if you have got funding? So how would you divide your 100% funding in such in making the best of it? In like giving 30% investing in tech, sales, or marketing? How would it be? Because as Kushagra said that the sales and marketing was not up to the mark when they started their startup. So it was like in initial phase they didn't had any sale, and later on after around 20 months they had their first sale and all. So that's why I asked this. So how would you divide your funding?
Yeah,
See,
so I would
Cyril, I
like to.
don't think that there is a golden. Sorry, yeah. Sure, continue.
Yeah. So I would like to say that yeah, as Suraj was saying, that there's no golden or magic number on this distribution. So in every stage, this figure can change according to the needs of the product and the company. So in the starting phase, let's say you are doing market research. So you need more funding on a market research rather than on a tech product development phase. So later on, when you pick up the tech development part, then you can focus on more resources on tech development rather than marketing. And when a POC is developed, then you can focus more on marketing and sales rather than on tech. So I would say that
Also, I think
just make a roadmap
I think
and just create a plan before executing that.
also I think one thing which I would like to add is that instead of like dividing for one particular strategy, you should divide your funds into multiple strategies. Essentially, build, fail, repeat for each strategy which you use. You try a particular strategy, build it, fail in it, or and then repeat the process. Do not just say, "This is my strategy. I'm going to invest 30% on tech, 30% on sales, and 40% on marketing." And at the end of the strategy, if unfortunately it does not pans out, you are left with nothing. I'll say divide your goals and the timeline and the money into different strategies which you will try out in the future. And if you see a strategy, a particular strategy performing better, invest more in that strategy. Essentially, build, fail, repeat.
It's more about ROI as well. Investing in one of the departments may lead to a better ROI for you. So if you keep a track of the data all the time, so just like the point as Kushagra mentioned also, we were continuously investing into tech, but we were never keeping track of the ROI that we were getting from tech. So that was one of the biggest learnings that we took from the startup. We did not calculate the ROI that we were getting on our investment. It was just in terms of number of hours initially, but that was also a considerable investment. So we should have taken an ROI on that. And if it was not reflecting as per the expectations, we should have changed the strategy, which we did not. So yes, keeping track of the ROI and then basis the data, you can make switch into the different department, which gives you a better ROI.
Also, I would like to add one more point. Don't hesitate to change your approach. You might think that I have invested this X amount of resources in this approach. I am sticking to this approach only because I've already invested X amount of money. Because that approach is not going to succeed. You know that.
Oh, sure.
Thank you, Cyril. Cyril, if you have any question, go ahead and write up.
Yeah. Just I had one more question as well. Since Animesh was saying that Zoom and Team is not an appropriate platform and doesn't have full resource for teaching. I do agree with that because my sister's kid are also learning, and their schooling has started, and they are all on Zoom and all. So I find the knowledge base kind of thing missing on the applications. So for Animesh, what would be the thing? And for all three of you, that what all would be the things if this EdTech can add to it, apart from Zoom? For example, if we take applications like Zoom or Teams, so what would be the add-on part they could add from their side, so that it can be more collaborative and interactive for students?
So that's a really good question, Cyril, actually. We also experimented a lot while we were building our product. So a lot of thoughts came into our mind, like what exactly to put into the product so it feels like this is a classroom or a school environment, because it's just an app ultimately. So unless you give the student and the teacher that experience that it is related to educational stuff, they'll abuse it for different purposes, just like what's happening with Zoom and Microsoft Teams. So what we tried to do was we tried to create a structure inside the app, just like what you get inside a school. So just like a school has classrooms, we had the concept of classrooms. Just like you have a concept of a board, a notification board, we had sort of a wall or a notification wall for the students. We had discussion forums. We had Q&A, rooms kind of a thing. We had group chats where a specific classroom could basically, all the students of a specific classroom could discuss any question, any queries amongst themselves. So we tried to replicate, the physical feel of a classroom and put it inside the app. So I'm not saying that's the perfect approach. We tried to take that approach, and we got good numbers on that actually. Group chat was introduced on the recommendation of a teacher. We did not, the class group chat. It was introduced on the recommendation of a teacher. We did not build it initially. When we put it into the system, we came to know that instead of the discussion forums, the group chats were actually being used to discuss the questions, mitigate the doubts of the students, and the teacher did not even have to be involved. One of the students used to ask the question and the other one was answering inside that particular classroom. When the teacher saw it, he was giving a thumbs up. Yeah, you have done a good job. So, we need to experiment, because the psychology of kids and teachers, they are basically, very limited to the way they perform in a school. So they should be able to, feel that same thing when they are using that platform also. So just that we had in mind, and we also believe that the future startups that come up, they should also, think around those lines and build some very innovative solutions. I'm very hopeful that some startup will definitely do it.
Right. And just to add on to the point, that we forget that we are not living in an idealistic world. We cannot ask or that a student has to behave in such a way. So physical environment gives that space of having that mischief. That mischief always happen in the physical space, but when it happens on the technology, it accelerates that mischief in much more with what we are seeing in the Zoom bombing kind of scenarios. And this would be another challenge to also tackle, that apps should not be considered as an idealistic place. There will be some student who will not behave as what the system demands. And how could then the technological system could incorporate that thing? But that's again a philosophical and other discussion to happen, that we could do it in the later. But moving on to Gaurav, would love to bring in Gaurav, who could introduce himself and ask his question directly to all the co-founders.
Hello everyone, this is Gaurav.
Hi Gaurav.
This is a bit on education, so thought of joining this particular session. My question is, like tech on the content part, like what do you think about like Suraj animation? Sagar have answered most of the questions which I had, but my thing is tech can be sorted. Tech is somewhat, Google Classrooms are there, which may improve, which will improve with time. But don't you think the main point of consideration is content and pedagogy? Like the content should change. We're not making them, critical thinkers. We're just, as I think Sudarshan mentioned, that rote learning is there, which is still there. Even, we have moved to online classes, but still the invitation of physical classes. Like teachers come, they teach their content and go away, give the homework. So how to improve on that part? What should be introduced? When the kid should be, introduced to such learning? Should it be 7 years of age, 10 years of age? The content should change. What should be there? Like any thoughts on that? Because most of my thought goes there, like what to change and how to change that.
Yes, Gaurav, definitely. What you're saying, it makes perfect sense. You cannot teach a student who is of age 15 the same way as you teach a student of class 7, the approaches of learning must be different for each particular age and classroom level. What I think is that the main thing which revolves around today's content platform is that every content which major major educational institutions are creating are around 40 minutes long. And it has been proven scientifically in many research papers and has been peer reviewed by many scientists as well, that the attention span of a particular human being is not that long. It's only 7-8 minutes. So what I think is to create bite-sized content for the future, instead of like explaining the whole stream, the whole structure per classroom, creating small bite-sized content which would cater to a particular topic, which will have some prerequisites before learning to that topic, and then some after impacts of that topic. That okay, if you have learned this, if you have watched this video, if you have gone through this content in the last 10 minutes, you can attempt this questionnaire. Bite-sized contents, I think, would be a thing of the future, which I don't think anybody is presently doing, because it essentially captures the whole of the attention span of a particular user himself.
Okay, but would Suraj, a follow-up question? But bite size is good idea, but would it cater to all the students? Because most of the students are still would they be able to catch up? Just a just a thought. Would they be able to catch up with the bite size?
Yeah, the structure. Bite-size content. When I say bite-size content, it needs to be powered by your knowledge map efficiently. So creating a simple bite-sized content for a particular subject will not work. It should contain a whole graph of information which essentially drives the UI, which will serves a particular bite-sized content at the appropriate time to the user. Bite-sized content, when I say bite-sized content, it does not mean a unique piece of information served independently, but a chain of content, a chain of bite-sized content served to a particular student in a particular order, so that the learning is complete. The learning is not essentially left out. Something is not left out, but kind of like a series-wise approach towards learning, rather than dumping a lot of information at a single point of time on a student himself. A knowledge graph needs to be built, which will deliver this content with a certain degree of, toughness of that particular subject to the students. If the system detects that the student is not as good in mathematics, so before jumping on the bite-sized content for coordinate geometry, the system might recommend the student that you need to follow up on linear algebra first before you jump onto this topic. So an intelligence system needs to be built. We tried building it, of course, because we had this exposure, but then again, content creation is an expensive task to handle, and we didn't have sufficient funds to generate this huge amount of content as well. So
I guess, point,
yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gaurav. Prince, would you love to ask your question? Or if there's any problem with the audio, I or Atul could ask the question.
Hello. I'm sorry. Am I audible?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So I'm Prince, and I actually manage corporate contracts. So majorly in the maintenance space. So there have been great insights while I was hearing how the focus to experiential learning has evolved over time, and you have been, I would say, kind of pioneers in this. Locally, I would say that would definitely be the right statement. But going forward, I am looking to understand your views as to while the penetration of internet is very much similar to how in rural areas to how it is happening in metro. So are there any good opportunities for edtech, academic or non-academic, in the rural space that you see going forward? Most of the players are basically catering to metro and tier 1 consumers.
So definitely, yeah. tier 2 and tier 3 markets, not just in edtech, but every other industry is also basically trying to explore that. Yeah, it will be a change, the change in approach of teachers as well as students as compared to tier 1, and the incentive required to shift them from a physical classroom to a digital classrooms will be much larger as compared to a tier 1 city or a metro city. So that's why the companies are basically not investing much into changing the user behaviors over there as compared to the metros and the tier 1s, because ultimately it's a business. If you are losing money on doing something, you would not do it, right? So that's why you would
Also,
see
with the advent of cheap devices, cheap smartphones, and penetration of India's internet connection reaching even the villages nowadays, I don't think it's a matter of reach, but as Animesh mentioned, that it is a matter of changing approach towards learning. Because most of the people which I have been interviewed during our startup ventures who were from tier 3, tier 4 places, they said that essentially you cannot learn online. How can you learn online? Online is for like stupid things, entertainment and stuff. So there needs to be a startup which can use entertainment as a medium of teaching in those areas, and then shift them progressively towards a better, more holistic way of education. So essentially, you are trying to raise their bar in terms of understanding technology and help them understand that, okay, learning is possible via smartphones also. Learning is possible via internet also.
But again, that is capital.
Yes.
Yeah. Please go on.
See, I actually would, reiterate this question in another fashion. There is a friend of mine. So she now, like, she was working, and because of some domestic constraints, she had to, she was now a housewife. She couldn't really take up a job. But recently, she has started teaching, English to the rural folks after she could get that, there are people in rural areas who are, willing to learn English, but so she's attempting to do it online. Like, she creates content, and then she sends all the homework over there, and then after that, people, if they consume content, then one-on-one she interacts. How did they like? Are there any doubts? So specifically, like, I'm not saying all the academic courses, but specifics. So in this case, is there any advice that from your end that I could pass on to her, while she's strictly focusing on rural, especially youth of rural? Yeah.
Okay, so is the one of the questions that I would like to ask, is the content being created in the vernacular language and then being passed on? Like, is it a translation of the vernacular language into English, or is it kind of a video session that she's teaching on board and that is being broadcasted to the students?
No, it's not on a board. Actually, like, it's she tries to she tries to create exercises, and her medium is local language usually. So, and then of course she also engages then in English also. So she creates presentation, that's and then with that she tries to fuse in some videos also supporting what she's trying to say. So not the classroom type of approach, board and chalk paper, not that, but this is what she's doing. So that the idea is to make it interactive for rural folks, and not to be something which is very autonomous, or like it shouldn't be boring.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
So I was in touch with, and that's the reason I actually was wanted to join this when Pranjal talked me about. So it would be good if you could give some advices there for her that I can pass on.
So as for tier 2 cities, we had a lot of discussions with some big names in the industry. So what they told was vernacular was one of the biggest factors while you were trying to target the tier 2s and the tier 3s. So I guess she's right on that path when she's using the vernacular language to create content. Secondly, if it is a personal project, like she wants to be projected as a teacher and she wants to create her audience in tier 2s and tier 3 cities, that is absolutely great. That will work fine for one of the tutors where she has, say 1,000 or 2,000 followers in tier 2 and tier 3 cities. From
Right.
business perspective, if you are looking to grow it as a company in tier 2 and tier 3, I guess that will require a lot of effort. So
Okay.
on a personal front, that is a very good idea and should work, I guess, in my opinion, should work. Because there are
Okay.
very few tier 1 teachers and good teachers who are looking to go after the tier 2 and tier 3 students. It's not like there is shortage of money over there, but just that they are not so motivated as we are in the tier 1 and tier metros to push towards new teaching methodologies and adapt new teaching techniques. So that's
Right.
why there is a kind of inertia over there. But if you build a strong community, that is bound to last for a long time as a personal brand.
Great. So there is another question which is off the topic here. It is majorly a general question because at times it actually, because you have actually been through that phase. So there are a lot of budding entrepreneurs or who are looking to venture out. They are scared. What if things don't really work in that sense? Like we don't. So I would try, very frankly ask this. So if things don't work, and if a founder has to go back to the world of job, then is there any leverage that he has by by engaging in the entrepreneurial journey that the job world recognizes and uh, awards, or is there a downside actually that he is not continued? And so I think if you could give clarity there, that would help people who
I
are
guess
looking to
all three
venture.
are equally eligible to answer that. So, Prashant, would you like to take that?
Yes, yes.
So personally, I didn't face any problem per se. The startup experience definitely increased the technology which I knew before and after doing the startup, because in startup you'll have to like do everything for yourself. So let's say when Animesh was creating the backend, me and Kushagar actively helped in that too. When I was managing and creating the mobile applications, Animesh and Kushagar was in fact hands-on the development part. So we all had worked in different environments, and definitely, and it taught us a lot, because the more information and knowledge you have about the technological system, the better you are served in the industry. As per a particular person, I will definitely say to weigh in the benefits and the risks first, and because one of the better things, which is essentially not a great thing and not a good thing about India, particularly which I like, is that the differentiation of pedigree from a particular individual is from. So the fact that we were from a premier tier 1 institute made that part easier for us. So I definitely recommend to weigh on the positives and the negatives before taking this decision. But then, yes, definitely, if you are passionate about the project or the opportunity you are working on, you should jump into it, because most of the successful people which I know, many of them are entrepreneurs as well, are the people who are doing in the field, who are working in the field they are most passionate about. So that is a very strong metric for success, or pathway for success on my part. And if you have developed enough skill sets during your entrepreneurial journey or before that, I don't think that there is a limitation of jobs or scarcity of jobs in the market. If you have skills, you would definitely be honored at any company which is out there.
And I personally believe you get more respect when you join any organization after a startup experience. Launching a startup and then going back to corporate, showing them that you have worked in all the departments, not just you are restricted to one particular domain or one particular department of that big organization. It helps
So
you
that,
gel with the other departments as well.
does that also applies to non-tech roles? Because tech roles, I understand that the technology side gets more stronger for as an individually, like you have better grip over the technological part. But like, what about the non-tech people who are into business development and sales, marketing?
So I don't think that any of us are quite enough qualified for answering that, because we experience. So I don't think that giving an answer just out on a whim would be appropriate here. But that is a situation which I personally think I cannot answer.
All right.
Animation, Kushal, would you like to weigh in on that?
No, I can just say, like, whatever your forte, before beginning a startup, that will enhance exponentially. So if you spend 2 years in a corporate working on your own skill only, and you spend those same years in a startup, with your own forte, you are, likely to learn 10 times more new things as compared to a corporate. So ultimately that will lead to a good result, hopefully, that should ultimately, because you are 10 times more learned than any other person working in the corporate. So there are companies who are willing to take in people, even if you see job descriptions nowadays, since I've worked in the job industry as well. So the job descriptions also have started mentioning, startup experience preferred, not just for the tech roles, any role they have started writing this, because they have seen people who have done exceptionally well after coming back from a startup. So it is a very positive trend that the corporates are taking nowadays.
I think that's a very encouraging scenario.
Yeah. So Prince, let me share my experience, what I faced, what was my experience regarding this. So after deciding that I will be joining a job or doing a job, I went to OYO for the interview, right? So after that, the person who took my interview, I had a chat with that person. So he told me that your startup experience was the most important thing, which lead to your selection.
Oh, okay.
That was
that is really
part.
encouraging.
Yeah.
Okay,
He told
so basically,
me specifically, yeah.
The risks are now. I think it's an evolved world, and people are recognized if they have attempted, and I think just the degree part is something which may not be we can depend on. Maybe that so that's it's a good scenario. I mean, it's just really encouraging that you guys are giving positive thoughts on this. Great, thanks guys. I think these are the 3 questions that I had in mind. Thanks a lot.
Chris. Thanks.
Hello everyone, hope you can hear me.
Hi.
Okay, yes. My name is Atul Verma and I run a UX research agency called Ethnity. We provide user research services like user interviews, usability testing, prototype testing, testing concepts for companies, and we try to provide insights which companies could work upon and improve their design and make user-centric products. So we try to answer companies' question regarding their users, and we try to find out insights that could be useful for them. And thank you so much, Kushagra, Animation, Suraj, for taking out time and sharing your journey with us. It's been very valuable discussion. And so I just wanted to know about your experience in getting user feedback while you were working on the product, and your experience on validating ideas, because I assume when you first decided to work in K-12 category of education, you would have so many ideas to think upon, to do brainstorming and to ideate. And of course, a lot of things are happening around. Lot of talks are being around about different concepts, and there have been different experiments in education sector. So you must have a a good list of ideas on what could we do and what ideas could be worth doing and what ideas could not be worth doing. So so just wanted to know your experience on how did you validate ideas, how were you deciding which ideas to pick and which ideas to scrap. So wanted to know your experience on getting user feedback and validating ideas. And after that, if it would be great if you could share some tips on how entrepreneurs could get early user feedback, and how could they do, how could they validate their ideas effectively, efficiently. If you could, if you could share some tips on that. Yeah, so those two things, would like to know your thoughts on this. Thanks.
So I guess what you can always validate an idea with an MVP. I mean, MVP generally does not cost much in terms of creating and marketing, and the sample size and the sample number of people who are interested gives you an insight on that particular product. We were very fortunate to have very good friends and advisors on our side. So whenever we had like a thought which we thought was good for our company, we used to discuss it with our friends. So I also see a general trend among entrepreneurs to keep their ideas secret before they release it. So I don't think that that's the correct way to go, because a person can copy your idea, but they can never copy your vision. And we similarly never faced any problem with that either. But yeah, talking to your friends, getting a view of the market, and when you launch MVP, there should be a very good NPS, Net Promoter Score, a calculation metric, customer satisfaction score. There are various things which you can implement inside the MVP, which will tell you about the interaction of the product. You can use different essentially analytic systems, and most of those systems are free for startups for a small bandwidth of users, and that will give you very good insight about what your idea is, where your idea is performing, where it is lacking. And it is true that the number of users tell you the true story, not your friends or other people. Users, their interactions, their essentially the time they spent on your infrastructure, the way they use your infrastructure. So as me and Animesh mentioned, that our aim was to help schools in the management of the essentially educational resources and increase collaboration between the students. But the two things which our users taught us was that, okay, discussion forums are not as efficient as chat provides immediacy. That was a learning for us. We learned and then created more specific features oriented towards chat on that matter. So you need to look at your product both as a novice and as an expert when your user interact with it, and then decide whether to follow a particular essentially way or the other one.
So there is a interesting story also around it. One thing I guess everyone forgot to mention, we pivoted the product around 3 times during our entire journey. So when we finally pivoted to the coaching centers, the private tutors, we were fed up like building the product first and then showing it to the end consumer, and they refusing it for one reason or the other. So when we were going after the coaching centers, what we did was we just searched for coaching centers near me on Just Dial, and what we did was we tried to get in contact with them without building the product. So we told them that we have an idea and we'll get you more users on, there will be more students will be able to visit your or attend your classrooms, and you'll have a better source of income. This was our cold call, and I guess we made around 55 cold calls, and we got a response from around 80% of those. Had we been pitching the product over there, I don't think 80%, I guess 8% would also have been very difficult to get them interested in getting a talk. So when we, when we went there, we discussed with them the platform that was not even built. We had just envisioned it, that will be providing you a classroom. You can create your private classrooms. You can sell it. You can create, one video and sell it to the different students. We got a lot of feedback over that. So we collected all that feedback, and finally we built the product that was meant for coaching centers. So I guess that's how we learned. The first 2 pivots we built, then we showed to the end consumer. The third pivot, the final ultimate pivot, which was the best amongst them, that was basically first gather the feedback, listen to everything, mix your own input, and finally build the product. That worked. It did not go that long. That is a different story. But yeah, that approach definitely worked for us. So
Actually,
with minimal
we had good traction in terms of how we reached up to a certain number of coaching institutions in a small duration of time. The main issue was inability to raise funds, and even with the traction which we thought were good at the moment of taking the decision to shut the startup down, the decision were more motivated towards lack of funds and lack of essentially a proper way to move forward rather than traction. We had traction. We did not have like enough traction, overwhelming amount of traction, but the people who we were pitching our product to in terms of coaching institutes, they were very happy and eager to implement it, and they were using it also. So there is a company in the market itself which is in the same market, and they have, last I heard, raised millions of dollars in the last 2 months.
Okay, all right. Yeah. So Suraj, just a little more. I'd like to little more expand on how could entrepreneurs get early user feedback and validate their ideas effectively. Any specific tools that you would like to recommend that have helped you?
So there are many market research tools. You can look at what you're trying to build, see if there are similar products in the market, see if they have traction, see if they have raised any funding, how many users they have, analyze their platform. And if it's a new product, just create essentially a random page, just buy a domain, create a random SEO page on Google, and do some SEO over it in your idea. The number of people who search for that particular topic will land onto your page, and you will get an accurate estimate of users who are interested in their idea. This is not something which I have manufactured, but I have learned from different people over my experience. So one thing is that either your idea is unique or your idea is essentially similar versions of your idea exist in the market. If versions of your idea exist in the market, look at your competitors or probable competitors, their traction, their scale. What do you think they are doing wrong in the community because of which they are not getting to the number of users or the amount of traction which ideally they should have, which you are expecting? And if your idea is unique, create a Google page, create a website, small website. It actually takes less than 12 hours to get a WordPress website live on the internet. The technology is so fast nowadays. And just see if you have traction on that particular website.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
So Himanshu Agarwal has a question over here. He's saying that VR is the future of edtech space. A lot will change once it is in the market. How long do you think it may take educational courses to be offered through VR by giants like Byju's? He has one more question. He wants to know your thoughts on learning through gamification approach.
VR is a long call. Actually, VR as a technology is very expensive nowadays. Even with Facebook acquiring Oculus, the prices per headset they provide is I will not say it's affordable in the context of Indian market space because it's somewhere around $800 a piece, which translates to around 60,000 bucks, 60,000 INR. So I don't think we would see a massive number of changes, but yeah, definitely VR is the future in terms of experiential learning. There are many medical colleges in United States and some medical colleges in India also who are using VR as an active approach to treat people about the body. I actually saw a video in which there was a VR content about essentially tour to the human body, in which you essentially move in the VR world inside of a human, and it was a very pretty good idea, pretty decent experience. But in terms of educational content, you would be able to help generate more interest among the children. But yeah, the possibility of providing it on a mass scale to a more number of users is the difficult part. On the same front, generating VR content is an expensive process, more than creating a good educational content. So cost would be a major player here, and the acceptance of technology in the coming. I don't think that in I guess 10, 20 years or so, there might be a chance that VR becomes a household thing, and people are using it day-to-day basis. There definitely would be a significant number of people who will use VR for education, but not in the next 5 years, I guess.
So
Before
essentially,
EdTech, it
VR
will
is not
require.
VR is not a mature product right now on that level that it can provide cost-effective solutions to every, not just edtech industry, but all industries right now.
I guess Animesh can cover the gamification part. Actually, he researched while we were in the Coster about introduction of gamification into our platform itself.
Yeah, as for gamification, a lot of players are doing a lot of things around gamification. Even the exams are being converted into adaptive methods. So if you take your international exams like GMAT and GRE, they are taking the adaptive approach. But there has not been a concrete solution around this approach. One way solution that can basically be implemented into any kind of learning, that can basically help a student learn from zero till the point he wants to. So yes, the system is evolving, but it's not a game changer yet. Everyone is saying that they have the gamification system in place, but ultimately it leads to how you are doing compared to a certain group of people. So basically, at some stage in your learning, there will be a difference compared to the other students. So yeah, it will be a game changer when machine learning evolves to that particular stage, that at each step it is able to produce specific and very unique content for every user. But as for now, it's a long shot. Gamification is still a long shot.
Thank you, Animesh, Tushar, and Suraj.
So, if Samarth has any question to ask, if Samarth is still there in the...
Yeah. Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yeah. Hi, Samarth.
Okay. Hi. Actually, I had two questions, but one was previously answered. I was wondering, so there will be two ways to think about it. One is to create a platform that is so, for lack of a better word, complicated. Like you want to create a classroom, right? Like with you have group texting experience, whatever, all the kinds of experience that you get in a physical school, you are trying to recreate in a virtual environment. But versus you just providing a platform for like a Zoom kind of a thing where the teacher is teaching and students are attending via video conferencing platforms. That would be the minimalistic approach, that you are just able to enter the classroom, get the video, get the education, and then move on. So what I'm trying to compare here from your own experiences is actually, would you make a platform which I believe would be more complicated and less for user, I won't say less user friendly, but you have to have a learning curve which is not able to be provided in a smaller context, right? Like if people don't know how to use a complicated platform, they will not be coming back to use it. Versus you just providing them with an education in the sense of, yeah, you can now attend your classrooms virtually, where you are not monitoring anything. It's just, yeah, it's teacher's job to make sure that the classroom is interesting, not your job. Your job is to make sure that the students are able to learn. So I don't know how Coster like evaluated these two things. Like you provide users with everything versus provide maximum people with the minimum amount of things. So I want to know what your approach was before, and if you have to do it again, would you try considering it differently? Thanks.
So this was one of the reason why we were not successful, because we tried to build everything in one go. So what eventually we did was that we didn't make the individual features robust enough so that they can be used by the students more effectively. Suraj, do you want to continue?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I actually got distracted. Someone came to my room. So the thing is that we, as Kushal mentioned, we try to do everything, which made our product complicated. But yes, today's as the design is evolving, there you have minimalistic approach, right? Minimalistic approach does not dictate specifically that you have less amount of features in your system, but presenting in a way that the cognitive load on the user is not as much, and the person using that system does not feel obligated to use all the products. And nowadays, there are exceptional designs which have a lot of plethora of features integrated with them, but you see only the most common used by a particular user. So you can essentially create a design artificial intelligence system itself, which can predict that which feature is going to be used by which user, and just see only those components of that particular design on the screen itself. It would be definitely a difficult product to design, but if you cut down on features, there might be some clients who you are going to miss out on because they do not find that specific feature on your platform. And if you overload your system with features which we did, then there would be a cognitive load issue in which the hindrance of the psychological hindrance of a user to use your product would be greater than what you ideally desire. So there needs to be more research to be done in this area. And if we let's say with the knowledge and information which we have now, if we have to do it again, we would definitely move towards a kind of mutable user interface paradigm in which we will build different features, but only features which are relevant to a particular user, a particular community, a particular classroom is visible to them. So for example, a simple example would be that a classroom in which the teacher is interacting via discussion forum would be the prominent thing, and chat would not be the most prominent thing there. But a classroom in which most of the students are interacting via chat, the chat will make itself the more prominent thing, hiding the features of discussion forum away from the user part. A more dynamic approach needs to be accepted in this particular scenario.
Yeah. So again, as was mentioned earlier, also these are just the temporary solutions that are being adapted. So Zoom or Microsoft Teams, yeah, they are good for broadcasting your videos. Yes, since you're not able to do it at the time, so you're using them and it's working for you, that's okay. But at the back of your mind, at the back of the mind of the teachers, they also know that it's not a long-term solution for them. It's not a platform that is meant for teaching. You can use Facebook as well. Schools at least realize that much, that since it is a social platform, Facebook also provides me the feature of Facebook Live. I can broadcast my online teaching sessions on Facebook as well. I can broadcast it on YouTube as well. But they know that there are a lot of other distractions that are present on those platforms. So they have, refused to take those. They have taken a slightly milder approach, a platform that is less intrusive and less distracting as compared to the social medias. But still, it is not the perfect platform. And they also know it at the back of their mind. So that's it. You need ultimately a solution that will basically provide you a comprehensive solution instead of just a hack for the temporary situation that we are in.
The corresponding thing Aman Singh is saying that Airmate is a new platform you can use for teaching.
Yeah.
But yes, your points are relevant and it's already.
Yeah, sorry, I was just gonna say thanks. Yeah, actually, that makes more sense that you can provide more features if you want, and you can based on artificial intelligence or whatever way you're using. But I still think I'm actually was very intrigued when someone else asked the question about introducing your platform to the rural community or top tier 2, tier 3 market. But I just think that the inertia to move into that market would be hard, and that's why I would be very strong. But I just think that as of now, if I was a student and I had the opportunity to not learn, right? I can always go on Facebook and YouTube and do other things. But at the same time, I was just wondering, if you make a platform that is so feature loaded and has all these engaging elements that keeps you coming back to the thing, but I don't know, in my opinion, it would be still very hard because most of the people are not even able to get that video, right? If they're able to get that video, you'll be able to capture more market. But of course, it's not you have actually walked the talk. I'm just talking. So, but anyway, I think your opinion is actually pretty good. Your insights. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, guys. It has been 8:15 going to be, and it is more than the time we expected. And I think the session went well, and thank you guys for sharing your journey, your experience, your thoughts in the EdTech space, online learning. It was much inspiring. At the same time, we learned a lot. Hopefully all of them learned a lot. And as you said that we would love you to host again. As you said, never say never, once an entrepreneur, always an entrepreneur. So we hope to host you again in the future. And Rishita or Atul, if you have any points in the closing comments, please go ahead and do it. And we shall stop for today. It has been a good evening. Thank you, guys.
Yes, and thank you so much, Kushagra, Animesh, and Suraj. It was very insightful talk. We get to know what challenges did you face and how you tried to overcome them. That was very valuable.